Chapter 6, Brandon, Manitoba. The city of Brandon, Manitoba, was the next stop I made on the way east. I wasn't going to stay there for a long while, but things took a swing to a direction I was not expecting. When the bus pulled to the station, it was already 6 o'clock on Saturday morning. Everything around was quiet, as it was the weekend slow-motion atmosphere, which was so usual around here. I left the station to a nearby coffee shop for a good cup of hot reach coffee. It was then when I suddenly realized I was undercover again. In the far corner of the cafeteria, sat a man I noticed somewhere before. He held a large page of newspaper and pretended to be reading. I knew he was one of the people who were on my back for quite a while before. These people I managed to escape unexpectedly, on the way to Vancouver, in Hope, BC. I was filled with a sudden flow of warmth, which flashed through every part of my body. This time it will not be easy to fool them. And it was clear that if they wanted to kill me on the spot, they could do it so easily and without taking any risk at all. I was a complete stranger, and the identification documents I had, could easily be removed from me for the purpose of making me an unknown. I felt I went too far, by making these people really mad. After all, who was I? I was no one and with no power, or any close relative in the entire country. It was going to be a question of survival, in the next day or two. I drank my coffee slowly, as I assessed the situation. I could go to the nearby police station and ask for protective custody, but for how long? No one could tell me what could be the reaction of the police. It was either risking the chance to keep on going penniless, without food or a place to stay, or going for the protected custody, and be faced with questioning and dilemma of hard-to-explain answers. I finally decided to go on, no matter what. I started to walk in the streets of Brandon. I had to find a way to flee the place. But I didn't have money for a bus ticket, and the hitchhike path again was not exactly the safest solution I could think of. Suddenly I had an idea, a train. A cargo train. I could get on a cargo train which is heading east. Stay on it for as long as it moved, and without worrying about how long it would take, I may gain a long distance toward the east side of Canada. The railway ran across the city, I could see it from the street I was standing at. I took off quickly to a silo of grain that stood not too far from where I was. I hoped a slow-moving train will pass by, sometime later. I found an empty concrete structure at the entrance to the nearest grain terminal in the complex. The railway passed through the complex, and there was a good chance a train will pass by, although it was Saturday. In any case, the usual day-to-day life of the city will resume only on Monday, which left me 2 days to plan on hiding and catching a passing cargo train. I waited in the concrete structure for a few hours, until I finally ran out of passions. There was nothing which looked like coming soon toward the station, and the stagnation of everything around made me leave this place and look for some other alternative. I kept wandering in the streets of Brandon for the entire afternoon. I went to the east side of the city, hoping I could catch a ride with one of the trucks or cars driving east. I sat somewhere near a bridge which connected the main street of the city with the outgoing highway. I didn't notice at first that the bridge was running right above the railway. I sat there for about half an hour, when I suddenly heard the high-toned sound of a train horn. I jumped to my feet and looked to the direction the train was slowly coming from. It was coming from the west heading east. This is my chance, I thought to myself. I went down the bridge and paced quickly toward the rails under it. I waited in a distance for the train to arrive. As it approached me, I noticed it was as long as the eye could see. Perfect. The train was not moving fast, as it approached the bridge I was under. This could give me time to climb on one of the cars, and get myself comfortable in it for as long as I wished. As the train came rolling, it slowed down, right where I was standing. The cars kept passing by me for a few moments, as I heard the squeaking noise of its brakes. The moment the train came to a complete stop, was the perfect time to jump on board. I grabbed my chimmy-dan bag and put it on my shoulder, and jumped to the first car right in front of me. It was a long car, about 40 or 50 feet. I climbed on the dozens of steel rails which were neatly arranged on the flat bed of the car. The train started to move the second I was on it. The slow-paced motion of the quiet cars seemed to be pulled by some mysterious force, since the locomotives were so far I couldn't see or hear them. I walked slowly toward the backside of the car, while on top of the many tons of steel rails that which laid neatly on the car. When I reached the edge of the moving car, I noticed under the steel rails, an empty space, just enough to accommodate me and the ציוני.י bag. The rails were actually put on 2 or 3 levels of some steel tubing structure, that held them at place. It was just enough to get in and hide. As the train started to move, still under the bridge, a mean-looking native Canadian Indian, with wild-looking face, very long black hair, deep piercing dark eyes, stood about a meter away from the car and stared at me. The train started to accelerate as the buildings of Brandon started to pass by, faster and faster. I was quite secure inside the steel tubing structure, so I felt initially. For some reason I had to pull my head outside the car, and looked back toward the end of the train, trying to see the Indian. I had all the blood drained off my face and almost blacked out when in a distance I saw 3 males jumping on the moving train and disappearing in one of the cars. The train was moving fast, but they managed to climb on board just on time. I started to feel sick in my stomach. It was too late to jump out. They were on top of me now, and soon one of them, or even all 3 of them, can sneak toward me and shoot me, while the train was in high speed. Fireflies. I started to see the end of me. The train was already in full speed, as the cars jolted to the sides, with the pattern of the rails it was running on. I was desperate. I knew it was only a matter of time, before I will be gone. They couldn't hope for a better opportunity, to take the shot on my life. Or, maybe the entire train deal was a trap, carefully planned and executed. A fast-moving train which was running through nowhere, in the Great Plains of the Canadian Prairie. I could not do anything. I felt the train was running at a speed of at least 100 miles per hour. The heavy metal cars and the tons of steel on it, jolted violently as the train was speeding in the countryside. I took the bottle of water I filled from the river in the park, near Hope, BC, where I spent the night 2 days before, and sipped slowly. The jolting car kept moving my body in the same rhythm with it. I started to cry. I couldn't take any more pressure. I was in a place I didn't have anything with. The fast violent jolts of the running train, kept reminding me what a desperate situation I was in. Suddenly all the memories I had from my childhood, started to float in front of my eyes. I wasn't ready to die. Only a miracle will save me now. The train kept running for an hour. I didn't think of anything but the will to live. Suddenly the train started to slow down. At first it was hardly noticeable, but as the squeaky noise of the brakes grew louder and louder, I started to think of a possibility to jump. It was too early to jump, yet. I waited more and more for the train to slow down, and so it finally did until it stopped completely. I slipped off the car fast, with my bag in one hand, and hurried to the side of the rails, where there was a thick grass and bush, green and fresh from last winter. I laid face up inside the grass to hide, but it was too short to cover me and my bag. I started to cut grass from around me with my bare hands, and threw it all around me and on my body. Soon I was completely covered with green grass, while laying flat on my back. I covered the ציוני.י bag as well and waited. My heart was pounding violently. The train started to move slowly. I kept my eyes on the moving cars and froze. Even the up and down movement of my chest seemed too loud. I kept screening the passing cars with a sharp look. I was looking for a clue to the men whom I knew were in one of the cars behind. Suddenly I saw them. 2 of them stood in the space between 2 cars, which had containers on them. They both scanned both sides of the train, looking to see if I got off the train or any sign of me. The third one was standing on top of the front container, looking from above. They were looking carefully to all directions, to make sure they didn't miss any sign of me. I realized they didn't know I was looking at them. They made sure I did not jump off, during the short stop the train made. I froze, watching them on the moving train. My heart started pounding violently. I didn't dare move an eyelid. The train kept moving on, and the 3 men kept watching to the sides of the tracks, looking for clues. It seemed forever, before the train was at a safe distance, so I could breathe again. Finally, they were out of sight. I did not dare move, and kept lying under the grass, which made it completely impossible to spot me. At long last, I saw the last car of the train disappearing away from my sight. I was too terrified to move even then. It took me a few good moments to gain the strength to move my arms and legs, to make sure I was still alive. It was already about 9 o'clock in the evening, and the last moments of daylight of the typical Canadian dusk were fading away in the quietness of the field I was thrown in. I managed to get up and sit. I cleaned all the grass which covered me, and looked to the left and to the right of the tracks which converged in the distance. As I was about to get up on my feet, I suddenly froze. In a distance I saw someone walking on the tracks toward my direction. I had no time to cover myself again. It was a young man walking on the tracks, with his head glued down to the tracks in front of him. As he walked in a rather fast pace, he didn't bother raise his head. I froze in place and hoped for the best. I prayed the man will not see me. There was no doubt in my mind he was sent to make sure there was no sign of me along the path where the train made the stop. He got closer and closer. The tracks he walked on were about 10 to 15 yards away from where I was. I managed to get myself quietly in a laying position, on my back. I watched with anticipation as the man walked past me, without raising his head. It took another eternity to watch him pass me without seeing me. As he slowly got to a distance from where I was, I started to breathe normally again and hoped for the best. I started to crawl away from the tracks, in fear of being spotted. I didn't dare stand on my feet and walk. About 45 yards away from the tracks, I suddenly saw a cattle fence. It was quite a high fence, but I could manage to crawl under it, and pass to the other side. I kept crawling for about 10 minutes, away from the tracks, until I reached a tree I could sit under. I took a long sip from the refreshing water I had in the plastic bottle I carried in my bag. The sight I saw next, when I finally relaxed a little, was something I will never forget. Hundreds of flashing fireflies started to dance in the air in front of my eyes. Hundreds of flashing fireflies in front of me, at about the level of the high grass. It was something I never saw before, and at the time, I even didn't know what it was. The flashing shining tiny spots danced in front of my eyes made me lose my breath, yet one more time in such a short while. The fireflies kept dancing in the still air for half an hour. I was too fascinated to think of anything but the spectacular show of natural fireworks, which was thrown in front of me, in the middle of the great Canadian prairie. The spectacular firefly show symbolized something for me. In the fading daylight, semi-dark air, it was made even more amazing. It was a sight I will see in front of my eyes, forever. When the night completely covered the world around me, I saw the last firefly fade away in the darkness. I was beaten hard by mosquitoes by then, but that didn't bother me. I rose to my feet and felt it was safe for me to get on the tracks, which were my only chance to get anywhere. I didn't know where I was, and how far was the next city or town. I started to walk east. I was cheered up for the long night ahead. I kept walking on the tracks as fast as I could. On the left side, in a distance, I heard the noise of passing cars on what seemed to be a main highway. The night was completely dark with no moon, but the bright stars above were a clear indication of a totally clean sky. My pace grew faster and faster along the tracks. I was heading east. I had no clue how long I will have to pace in order to get to some city or town. I heard the noise of the passing cars on the nearby highway which ran parallel to the tracks. I thought I had to stay away from the main highway in any case. It wouldn't be wise to walk in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere, on a highway. After about 15 minutes of walking, I saw in front of me, in a distance, a railroad sign of an upcoming road intersection. I kept walking for about half a mile and reached the intersection. It was too dark to see. On the right side of the tracks there was a plantation, with many neatly arranged trees of some fruit. I could get in there and hide for the night, and keep going in the morning, but the night was an excellent cover for me, to get as far as I can from where I was. I still thought they will come looking for me. I simply wanted to cross the border to the US, but I had no idea where and when. When I arrived to the intersection, I saw it was a side road to the south. It was completely dark and deserted, at this time of the night, and I was the only soul in the entire vicinity. It seemed like no car is going to go through this road for a long time. I turned to the side road and started walking south. I knew there was going to be a road sign soon up front, as on the start of a sideway there must be one for the traffic which heads south, so I kept walking looking for that road sign to appear. After a few moments I saw it. I got closer to it and managed to read what was on it. It read Route 5 South, U.S. borderline 20 miles. I didn't believe what I saw. There was my chance to completely disappear and leave behind the wild beast people who were after me. I started to walk quickly past the sign, determined to get to the U.S. borderline at any cost. I was ready to walk all night, if that is what it will take. I hoped for a car to pass by, and maybe get a short lift to the south, perhaps even all the way to the border, but it didn't seem likely any car was going to pass through this road for the rest of the night. I kept walking. It was a street light in a distance that showed a sign of life on that deserted road. I was about half a mile away from it, when I first spotted it. I kept walking toward the street light. When I got there, I saw it was in front of an entrance to a place surrounded by a white, 7 or 8 feet wall. The street light was just in front of the gate to the place. I walked closer to the entrance and saw it was an isolated building, with a yard which had some trees, and a parking lot with some cars. There was a slight chance I could find something to help me in there, even though it seemed completely deserted. Maybe I could just drink some water from a faucet in the yard, or just spend the night there. I entered cautiously through the wide open gate, and looked around. It was a small yard with trees around. Inside at the end of the lot, there was a one-floor building, with some large glass walls and walkways leading to a main entrance. There were no lights in the building. In the parking lot, right on my left, I saw a few cars parking under the tall trees which were scattered around. I took a quick look back and forth, to the building and then to the gate. A thought flashed my mind. I may have a chance, if one of the cars happened to be opened, and maybe, just maybe have the keys left in the ignition. This remote hope came to me from the knowledge that people sometimes leave the car keys in the ignition, for a short time. I walked to the first car which was in front of me. It was a Chrysler passenger van, gray with metallic red trimming on the side. I couldn't believe, when I tried to open the door on the driver's side, it simply obeyed my hand and clicked open, turning the internal lights on. I looked inside, right under the steering wheel, where the ignition switch was supposed to be. I saw a bunch of keys hanging, and the ignition key in place ready to start. I pinched myself in disbelief and joy. I almost let go a scream out of surprise, from my gasping mouth. This is no less than a miracle. I entered the van and put my chimmy-dan bag on the back seat. The soft sound of the 2 ringing sounds sent a wave of relief through me, as I turned the ignition switch on one notch. The fasten seatbelt sign came on illuminating in front of me on the speedometer. I needed to see how much gas there was in it, and as the indicator stabilized on its position, the indication was 3/4 of a tank. This was yet another piece of good news. I turned on the ignition key, and the engine started running smoothly, like only a few moments ago it was running. Without hesitation I shifted to reverse gear, on the automatic transmission handle, next to the steering wheel. I released the parking brake, and slowly started to roll back off the lot outside to the road. I turned the headlights on, only when I was already on the road, heading south.